obviously trained to lie very well. They would obviously still also recognize the same kind of situation that we're in, and their advisors cannot be, let's hope, too much more stupid than I am. And if I'm picking it up, they ought to know about it, and so they need to make the kinds of plans that an adult is going to make when faced with these kinds of situations. And there's where we get into the rub of the whole thing, because we all have to stand up and accept our responsibility in this as adults. We can't go whining and say, oh, my entitlements, my entitlements, my entitlements. No, because the whole world has suddenly changed, and your entitlements just went poof because you were sold a bill of goods in the beginning and gave your power away. You don't have entitlements. You have what your personal responsibility is able to provide for you. And people had better start thinking that way really quick. That's part of our effort here, is not to make tons of money and be wealthy because it's a curse. Money is a curse mentally, and you know, I won't go into it, but our real effort here is to try and open people in terms of their mental perspective on what's coming down the road to them and how they participate in it. We don't have much in the way of control over circumstance. Anybody that suggests otherwise is delusional and naive. Humans really only control one single thing, and that is their attitude about any given set of choices they have to make. So given that, I personally would prefer to live with a whole lot of adults on the planet who have a good attitude about the adversities that we all face and the challenges ahead, as opposed to a bunch of whiny kids. They're going to cause problems and throw fits. And so we try and provide enough information to sort of take the edge off.
Well, you've taken something off here. I don't know if it's the edge or not, but that's one hell of a compilation of words and phrases, which when you think about them,
and they have gotten very much more in the vein of grim and dire since the last 2 years.
Yeah. Well, death of the dollar. Emotional stress, collapse of the U.S. of A dollar.
And we can see exactly how the mechanism will play out now. Because here we are with a lockdown, with it officialdom is desperately trying to pry open. The only thing they can use to pry it open is an endless stream of digidollars. They're hell-bent on creating these digidollars as fast as they possibly can.
Cyber dollars,
They don't really exist. They're just illusionary. However, they've got to be intruded into the system one way or another. And so the crack may very well relate to so much pressure put in by so much dollars being forced in that instead of mere hyperinflation, we get the crack-up boom of the Austrian school where it all happens at once, and instantly the Dow rises to 25,000. But it's kind of like sort of a double curse, or it's kind of a curse there, because 25,000 times nothing is still nothing.
Sure is. That's fascinating. I mean, just reading some of these expressions are amazing. Repudiation of all obligations.
Which they'll have to do. They won't be able to support Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and I don't want to frighten people, but they must be realistic.
Now, we're not talking about derivatives here. They're talking about government-supplied and provided
the derivatives
obligations.
The derivatives so outweigh the total financial
It can't.
health of the planet.
At least 16 times the total GDP. And those derivatives are all worthless, useless, absurdly valueless pieces of...
and look what they're trying to do. They're trying to pump and restart the whole thing again, and they want everybody to start rushing out and buying houses all over again. Somebody's really going to buy those mortgages now? I don't think so.
Not either. Be right back. Okay, a couple more excerpts from Part 6, and then we're going to tell you how to get your own copy in a few minutes with Clif. HalfPastHuman.com is the website. All right, here's the next one. Now, remember, these are not, they're in sequence, but they're spaced out. They're excerpts from throughout the report. Living in, quote, abandoned strip malls and other, quote, commercial buildings, as well as, quote, squatting, occupying of, quote, empty houses will become an accepted part of the, quote, new American U.S. of A. social order by the late summer of 2009. The populous U.S. of A. entity shows that by July of 2009, all the rules, that's a quote, rules, that's a word, by which the, quote, social contract was, quote, defined pre-October 2008 will be in a state of, quote, flux. This, quote, flux aspect attribute includes, quote, fluid at one end of its linguistic range and, quote, energetic reorganization at the other. The data sets are indicating that, quote, all components of the, quote, U.S. of A social contract, including, quote, law, quote, trade, quote, property rights / laws, and, quote, interpersonal communications will be both, quote, dissolving and, quote, being reconstituted over the summer of 2009. This is, quote, not to say that the process is anything other than merely begun next summer. The whole of the process is indicated to be 2 times generational, or nearly 40 years. That's another quote. In its total progression. I'm going to read the last sentence again. This is, quote, not to say that the process is anything other than merely begun next summer. The whole of the process is indicated to be, quote, 2 times generational, or near to, quote, 40 years in its total progression. Cliff?
Yeah.
It's quite an introduction for you. Go right ahead.
Well, it's sort of easy to see how such a thing will occur. The death of the dollar's been prevalent since we imposed it as the medium of exchange on the petroleum-producing countries with the overthrow of the Shah or the overthrow of the legitimate Iranian government and replacement with the Shah in 1953. The petrodollar has existed since then in really rock-solid form where everybody's afraid to do anything about it. Now, we're at the point where that dollar is dying and the petrodollar itself is going to die. So the pressures that are going to be placed on us, the United States, and that's all we export anymore, is dollars or some corrupted form of dollars in the sense of all these special interest vehicles, CDOs, etc., all these nasty acronyms that everybody's now familiar with. When those go, we're going to have to redefine ourselves. The powers that be have taken the last 50-plus years and redefined us from a nation of manufacturing, small business people that were independently minded who could cogently discuss things into this dumbed-down state of entitlement, I don't know, drones or nebbish, and we're going to have to overcome that. And I suspect a 50-year process will take probably close to 40 years to overcome. And we also have to bear in mind they've been dumbing down the education system since the 1890s, that the curriculum for the 1890s for high school is our current college people couldn't pass that curriculum.
No, I think I've run that story a number of times, and you're totally on the money with that. This also will be the first generation, this current generation of young people who will not live as long as their parents, nor will they...
That brings up the other issue. If you go and you read some of the very astute minds that are out there, such as Dmitry Orlov in his Reinventing Collapse, and you compare the existence of the people that went through the collapse of the Soviet Empire with the upcoming collapse of the American Empire, we're going to have to face some very serious, harsh conditions that will lead to if we're very poor at it, to a whole lot of unnecessary deaths, simply because the system will break down and for instance, the healthcare system will just go bluey all of a sudden, and we'll have a very difficult time putting it back together.
Right.
This will include things like pharmaceutical industries and all of our infrastructure. It's not merely electrical. We have an infrastructure issue that is based on the dollar, and to a large extent, those trade relations and everything will suffer and fail as a result of that. And the idea that we'll have to deal with free trade issues and negotiating these contracts after the death of the dollar is absurd. Nobody's going to want NAFTA, or they're not going to want to have, at an international level, to have anything to do with it.
They were just nails on the coffin.
Now, it's kind of curious the way the whole thing is shaping up, and you can certainly buy into the idea of the invisible hand and the power elite, and that brings us back to some really nasty symbology. And it gets down to this point. We do radical linguistics here, and if you go and investigate linguistics, it's really the scientific understanding of how language works and the changes that it goes through and what it really means to be human and express ourselves with language. And we're at a radical far edge of it because we think that we can make accurate predictions based on some of these nuances. But we are novices compared to some of the people that are moving in larger areas like symbology. And that brings us up to the idea of Michael Tessarian and some of his cohorts or his peers who are out there at the far edge of symbology. And they're actually getting into levels that are beyond our meta-art at the linguistic level and encompass archetypes that are exposed through symbols beyond words. And these people are doing some very powerful research that are uncovering some very powerful archetypes that are being hidden from us all quite deliberately, but are also at the same time being slapped in our faces. The Masonic stuff and, you know, the Washington, D.C. layout and all of this kind of thing. And you start getting into some woo-woo levels that to the trained, schooled, rational mind have been denied by officialdom and will continue to be denied. Unfortunately, those individuals that are trapped in that paradigm are about to experience a paradigm crash. And we're going to have a lot of people out there that are